Hello there minasan. My name is Seph-sama, also known as SephirothSword57, but you can call me Seph-sama. I am a content creator here on YouTube. I am also a game designer, analyst, musician, and a scholar of Japanese culture. I know that most of you already know who I am, but I bet there's at least one of you watching right now who thinks, who is this gentleman before me? So I am dedicating this video to talk about my life experiences and how I became the person you all see right now in front of you. Make sure that you go and grab that one shiobita you have in the fridge, as well as that one pack of Pocky that you've been saving for a special occasion. It's story time. And also make sure to stay for the end of the video for a special announcement. So, without further ado, I welcome you to the world of Seph-sama. Enjoy!
March 22nd, 1986. Two boys were born in a small city located on the east coast of Sweden. The first of the twins to be born was a boy named Dave. The other one was me, Seph-sama.
The first couple of years of my life is a blur, and I can't seem to remember all of it. But I can quickly summarize what happened from the information that I got from my parents.
Just 2 years after we were born, our parents got separated, and with that, our family got split in half. I got to stay with our mother, while Dave, my brother, got to stay with our father.
Our parents were not on good terms at the time, and they didn't talk to each other for almost 14 years. That means that me and my brother Dave didn't get to see each other that much. And it also explains why we have such different taste when it comes to preferred media.
This meant that we didn't really know each other that well, and why Dave got manipulated into playing Nintendo games, and why I got the superior experience of having a Sega Mega Drive.
Speaking of video games, let me talk about one of my first memories.
July 1991 is the month that the revolutionary and fantastic Sonic the Hedgehog was released for the Sega Mega Drive, and me, Seph-sama, was one of the lucky 5-year-olds to receive a copy of the game together with a Sega Mega Drive.
This might be the most important moment in my life, only being rivaled by my big exposure to Japanese culture, which we will get to later.
This was the first time in my life that I was truly dedicated to something. Sure, I had played some Sega Master System before that, but I never really owned a video game system myself before this moment. Not only was this my debut as a video gamer, but also the start of a wonderful, yet tragic, relationship with a company that revolutionized my life. It was at that moment I had become a lifelong fan of Sega.
Not only did they introduce me to the world of video games, but they subconsciously awoke my appreciation for Japanese media as well. I didn't know at the time, but soon I was going to be exposed to something that would make me appreciate it even more.
I unfortunately can't remember the year this happened, but it must have been around 1992 to 1994. The time when I first discovered anime.
Now, it's important to note that I didn't actually know that what I'm watching was something that was created in Japan, or that even a term like anime existed. All I knew is that they looked very different from what I was used to.
Space Adventure Cobra, Ginga Nagaraboshi Gin, and Starzinger were the first anime I watched. I can't seem to remember which one I saw first. I was very young after all.
All these anime were dubbed in Swedish. Now, I know this is unacceptable nowadays, but back then, in the early 90s, there weren't that many options.
I noticed how different these animated shows were in terms of art style, storytelling, and overall feel. But it wasn't until a year or two later that I found two anime that I really enjoyed. Those being Hokuto no Ken and Bishoujo Senshi Sailor Moon.
I got a VHS tape with the first couple of episodes of Hokuto no Ken, known more commonly in the West as Fist of the North Star. And they were unfortunately dubbed in Swedish as well. But I watched these episodes over and over, and there was still a lot for me to take from it.
I didn't think this type of violence and action could exist in an animated show, and the fact that they didn't hold back on the action is what was so fascinating to me. But the thing that was the most intriguing to me was, of course, the opening. Ai wo toromodose. It was at that moment that I knew that what I was watching was something that wasn't created in my country or even anywhere in the West. It was from a culture I had yet to experience in its purest form. The first opening to Hokuto no Ken will always hold a special place in my heart, and is one of my favorite anime openings ever.
But while Hokuto no Ken is a very good anime, it does take place in a post-apocalyptic world that is very different from ours. And the only thing that resembles Japanese culture are the principles behind all the characters' martial arts and some of the writing. But this is where Bishoujo Senshi Sailor Moon comes in.
This was the first time I realized that the animated shows that I've been watching was actually from Japan, because it actually takes place in Tokyo, Japan, and follows Tsukino Usagi, a Japanese middle school student who attends Juban Middle School.
As you can probably figure out, this was my first exposure to Japanese school life, as well as Japanese everyday life.
It was really intriguing for me that they were showing things like arcade centers, which was something that didn't exist in my area when I was growing up. I had no idea it was even a thing.
And that is how the seed of my appreciation of Japanese culture was planted within me. But it will still take a couple of years for it to truly blossom. As I got a bit older, my focus shifted more towards video games, which meant that I was, of course, focusing more on Sega.
And as we get closer to the mid-90s, my love for Sega had grown much larger, and I was ready for their next home console, the Sega Saturn. I was reading all about it in magazines, and was looking up all the Sugoi games that were planned to be released. This was a big moment, as it would be the first system that I would buy with my own money.
Unfortunately, that dream was not within my reach.
The price of the Sega Mega Drive over here was way beyond anything a 9-year-old could afford. I remember the cheapest I would be able to get a Saturn for at the time was just over 600,000 yen, or $600 for those of you who don't understand Japanese yen. I was of course disappointed, as I was really looking forward to getting my own Sega Saturn. But I thought, oh well, I guess I'll get one later when the price goes down a bit.
But that disappointment did not last for long, as with my hard-earned money, I decided to settle for another system that I've kept my eye on.
And so, by the second half of 1996, I got myself a PlayStation with the money I had saved up from before, and with the money I got for my birthday earlier that year, I bought a couple of games with it as well. Jumping Flash, Battle Arena Toshiden 2, Parodius, Tekken 2, and the newly released Resident Evil.
This was the start of a wonderful relationship that is still going strong to this day, just like Sega. Both Sega and Sony had a huge impact on my life, and I'm about to reveal the biggest one yet.
On Christmas of 1996, I got 2 more games to add to my collection, Jumping Flash 2 and Darkstalkers.
All those games were wonderful, but it only got better from there on out. 1997 was quickly getting closer, and the reveal of the best game of all time was soon to come. You know which one I'm talking about. It's on this shelf at this very moment.
It took a bit longer to come out here, but during the second half of 1997, the West got the taste of Japanese greatness, in the form of the Japanese role-playing game, or JRPG for short. Final Fantasy VII was a huge success not only in Japan, but in the West as well, as it popularized the genre and it exposed most people to a genre we'd never heard of.
Which also includes me. Everything from the amazing cinematics to the tight gameplay and to the story writing that was just top notch. Or top not. I'm sorry, I just had to say it. but this was the beginning and an introduction to a genre that I didn't even know existed.
And I wasn't alone. It was during this time I grew very close to a person who I previously knew for a few years already, since we were neighbors and also classmates. But our passion for Final Fantasy VII formed a bond between us that was not easily broken. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. Yes, I'm of course talking about my good friend Joachim.
Before then, me and Joachim were just acquaintances. We knew about each other, but we didn't really talk that much. Until one day, when him and his parents were over at our house, and he noticed that I owned a copy of Final Fantasy VII.
Me and Joachim became fast friends, and our love for this new genre guided us on a lot of adventures together.
The first of our JRPG discoveries we did together was actually just a couple of weeks after me and Joachim had bonded over Final Fantasy VII. And he described the game as kinda like Final Fantasy VII. That game was the hidden gem early PlayStation title, Beyond the Beyond.
And this is when me and Joachim started looking around for more JRPGs to play. And we came up with a rule so that whenever we purchased a JRPG, we would get a game that the other person didn't have, so that we could borrow JRPGs from each other.
For example, Joachim would get Persona 1, while I got Vandal Hearts. And Joachim would get Chrono Cross, while I got Xenogears. We would then switch games with each other, so that the other person could experience that game for themselves. There were of course exceptions to this rule, like how me and Joachim got our very own copies of Suikoden 1 during the summer of 1998.
It was the day after school graduation, and we were both downtown looking for games. That was when we were able to find a bargain bin that had 2 copies of Suikoden for only $10 each, so we couldn't pass up on this opportunity.
You can probably guess what me and Joachim were up to for the rest of the day.
I distinctly remember calling Joachim later that night to see where he was in the game and what he thought of the game so far. It was an unforgettable summer with a lot of good memories.
There are of course many more stories of me and Joachim's adventures together. But I just wanted to name a few of them, just so you know what my life was up to that point. It was a wonderful time. Unfortunately, those times were about to change. Fall of 1999 was a bit of a tough time for the young Seph. Joachim ended up at a different school, so we weren't classmates anymore. That wasn't such a big deal, because we would still hang out in the evenings and we still played a lot of JRPGs. But there were a couple of other factors that played into why I was starting to feel a little bit down.
We all go through it at some point. Where is my place in this world? What do I want to do with my life? This insecurity, coupled with the fact that by the year 2000, Sega was struggling with the sales of the Dreamcast, which made me feel quite sad. The company that had formed so many precious memories that would stay with me for the rest of my life was close to disappearing.
It didn't help that I didn't really have any friends at this new school. I was the quiet type, and I easily blended into the crowd. I wasn't being picked on, but I wasn't part of any bigger groups either of people. This was a time before I was known as Seph-sama. But that was about to change.
I used to study a lot during these times, and since I didn't really have much to do after school, I would spend about 2 hours in the school library studying every day. But then something amazing happened on one fateful winter day.
I remember this day very clearly because it hadn't started snowing yet. And by the time that school ended, it was completely dark outside, almost like it was midnight.
This day I decided to stop by the school library, like usual, even though I didn't have any homework, and there were no tests coming up since it was getting close to the holidays. I guess it was just out of habit, and I didn't really have anything else to do.
I entered the library, which was of course empty since it was after school time, and I took my usual place that was all the way in the back of the library, behind an empty bookshelf. Except that bookshelf was not empty on this day. Instead, it was filled with these paperback books I have never seen before. So out of curiosity, I had to check out what they were about. So I picked up one of the books from the shelves and I flipped it over to the cover, where it said, Naruto, Volume 5 by Masashi Kishimoto. Yes, this was the time that I first discovered manga.
The art on the cover stood out to me a lot. It reminded me of the art I've seen in my JRPGs that I've played previously, but there was something different about this one that I couldn't put my finger on. There was just so much color, detail, and personality put into these characters, and it made me even more curious to what this book was about. I had to give it a read.
But not before opening the manga from the wrong side, just to get a warning page that I was reading it from the wrong side. Now, this version of Seph-sama didn't know anything about manga, so don't judge him too harshly. He didn't know that mangas are supposed to be read from right to left.
Anyway, I started reading this volume, starting with the moment Team 7 first met with Rock Lee, and they started fighting each other. Even though I knew nothing about these characters, I just couldn't stop reading. I could relate so much to these characters and the struggles and challenges they were facing. And the humor is something that made me laugh out loud several times.
And before I knew it, I had read through all of Volume 5. I didn't even intend to read it all. I just wanted to take a look and see what it was. And luckily for me, since I was enjoying it so much, I noticed that the 8 first volumes of Naruto was on the shelf next to me. So I picked Volume 1 from the shelf and I started reading.
After a while, our librarian came over to the back of the library to see what I was gasping and laughing at. I was usually really quiet since I always came there to study. She was a kind older lady who always helped me out whenever I was looking for material I needed for my studies. And in exchange, I would help her carry heavy books and putting them on shelves she could not reach. She was pleasantly surprised to see me do something other than schoolwork, and that I was enjoying myself to such an extent.
I wasn't intending on being at the library for that long, but I couldn't stop reading. And before I knew it, I had gone through Volume 1 through 4 of Naruto. And as I was reading the 5th volume again, the librarian came over with a cup of tea for me to drink and a plate of cookies for me to snack on.
I spent the rest of my time in the library that day reading through the rest of the volumes that were available. It was a wonderful time for self-discovery, and I can thank fate for guiding me to the library that day. Otherwise, I might have not become the Seph-sama you know today. So you can probably understand why Naruto holds such a special place in my heart.
Unfortunately, it was time for me to go home. I had so much fun reading that I didn't realize that it was 7 p.m. already and school was about to close. But while I was reading, I noticed that there were other books in the bookshelf that looked similar to Naruto.
It was the first 20 volumes of Dragon Ball. I was really curious about them as well, and I wanted to read them, but since they were closing, I didn't have time to. Feeling defeated, I slowly started to move toward the exit with a heavy sigh. But I was stopped by our librarian, who then told me to take a couple of books home with me if I wanted. I happily accepted her offer and rushed over to the manga shelf and picked up the first 10 volumes of Dragon Ball and put them into my bag.
I'm sure you all know what I was up to for the rest of the day. But this was a very important day for me, because this was the day that I consider to be the day when Seph-sama was born. It's almost been 20 years. Can you believe it?
Not only had I found myself, but my social status in school had also improved. I now had a group of friends I hung out with who was all curious about what I was up to and showed me a lot of respect. Although they were into sports and such, which didn't interest me at all, we still had a good time together doing teenager stuff. You know, hitting on girls, putting nerds in their place, and having deep discussions about how to improve ourselves as human beings.
This was the first time I was able to teach other people about the superiority of Japanese culture. And I also discovered that I really enjoyed doing it. Being able to talk about Japanese culture and how we could use that to improve ourselves as human beings, as well as the Western society, was something that I found a lot of enjoyment in, as long as the subject was willing and open for improvement.
Years went by, and I kept doing what I've been doing since that fateful day I discovered myself in the library, reading all the manga I could get my hands on, playing JRPGs, now on my brand new PlayStation 2, and I found myself revisiting those old anime I was watching as a kid, only this time in their original Japanese language. Life was good, and as I was done with school, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, so I took a job as a forklift driver at our local warehouse, which is a job I enjoy since it made me feel like Ryu Hazuki from Shenmue. But even though I enjoyed what I was doing, it felt like I could do something else. I could give the world so much more.
But I finally figured out what I wanted to do with my life. And it is this. That's right. I want to be able to teach everyone about the wonders of Japanese culture and how it will improve our everyday life. That has been my goal ever since I started uploading on this channel. It has already been 5 years since I uploaded my first video. And I'm about to make another big change. The channel from now on will be called Seph-sama. And for those of you who are wondering, I will always be known as SephirothSword57. That is not changing. But I thought a change for the channel name would make more sense if it was called Seph-sama, since that is what all of you call me anyway. My game review show will still be called the SephirothSword57 show, and SephirothSword57 Guided will still keep its name. This is a new start for the channel, a rebirth if you will. And arigato for everyone who has been supporting me throughout these 5 years. Arigato gozaimasu. And an extra big arigato for the people who have been helping me out over on Patreon. It's been a big help, especially now that I'm going full time with the channel. Speaking of, the Patreon has also been updated, and you can expect a lot of more activity over there. For those of you who are interested, there is a link in the description down below to my Patreon that you can check out, and you can read up on the 2 tiers that are available on there. Other than that, you can look forward to the usual Seph-sama content, game reviews, cover songs, and much more. Arigato again for watching, and thank you for listening to my story. Have a good night, evening, morning, or day. Sayonara!